Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In today's video, we are going to include the next 20 creature cards with a CMC of 7 to our Momir Vig Cube. What's up, MTG baby? That is the MTG Burgeoning community. Here we are with another installment of our Momir Vig Cube series. If you're unfamiliar with this series or just kind of want a little bit of a refresher, search in the description below for the link to MTG Burgeoning's introduction to the Momir Vig Cube. Additionally, you can search in the same description for a link to Cube Cobra and view the entire contents of the cube as it stands this moment. All right, with all of the talk out of the way, let's start with another 20 creature cards for our cube, this time from the 7 spot. We are going to begin with mono green, and it is an Archweaver, a 5/5 spider with reach and trample. The defensive capabilities of this creature, being a reach and a 5/5, are pretty good, and a 5/5 trampler isn't bad either. So the Archweaver, to me, seems like it's going to be one of those on-the-fence creatures. It's really going to depend on what the battlefield looks like, what your opponents have in front of you, and whether or not you're going to send it into combat or hold it back for defensive purposes. Creature number 2 is a mono blue, and we have a Bird Wizard, Aven Fate Shaper, a 4/5 flyer. And when it ETBs, we look at the top 4 cards of our library, then put them back in any order. We can also pay 4 and a blue mana to look at the top 4 cards of our library and put them back in any order. Again, with the varied activated abilities and specific land abilities that are strewn already throughout this Momir Vig Cube, having the way in which to look at the top of that library and kind of fix it to what you're looking for as a way in which to top deck the specific lands that you want, Aven Fate Shaper may be a little more valuable upon first glance. Next up, in our first mono-colored creature of this video, it is Bane of Bala Ged, an Eldrazi, a 7/5 Eldrazi that whenever it attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents they control. This could be devastating, particularly if you can hit an opponent with this creature and they don't have adequate creatures to block and kill Bane of Bala Ged. Particularly if you can untap with this and attack again and again and again, you can completely whittle down the entire battlefield. Think of it this way: if you have ways in which to grant this evasion, unblockable, protection, man, Bane of Bala Ged is going to set opponents back, because if they don't choose their creatures, they're going to choose their lands. And if they get rid of their lands, then the quality of creatures that they can summon from the Momir Vig Cube is going to suffer. All right, next up, another colorless creature, and this one is going to be of the artifact variety. It is Barricade Breaker, a 7/5 creature that attacks each turn if able. And let's not even bother talking about the improvise mechanic, because that means nothing, because the Barricade Breaker, like every other creature that's summoned from the Momir Vig Cube, is summoned completely randomly. So any mechanics like improvise or convoke are absolutely meaningless in this cube. So if you are fortunate or unfortunate enough, depending on where you are in the game, to summon Barricade Breaker, you've got a 7/5 that's going to attack every single combat. All right, creature number 5, as we hit the quarter mark of this video, it is a mono black creature, and it is Black Dragon, a 4/4 flyer that when it ETBs, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 until end of turn. At this point in the game, it may be difficult to hit a -3/-3 creature and send it to the graveyard, thinking that this is minimally probably going to be around a turn 6, turn 7 summoning. However, there may be some creatures out there that have a toughness less than that, a toughness around 3 or less, that could be causing a lot of problems or trouble to the battlefield as a whole. So the The extra investment of 7 mana for just a 4/4 flyer does come with the backdoor removal, potentially, of an opponent's creature, and that could be very valuable. All right, creature number 6, and another mono blue drop. I'm sorry, another mono blue 7 drop. We have the Blizzard Elemental, a 5/5 flyer, and we can pay 3 and a blue mana to untap it. So we can send this into combat. It has evasion, so we pick one of our opponents that is, let's say, maybe lacking some flyers. We send this bad boy into combat, and then if we keep the right amount of mana open, and MTGBC, you've got islands in those basic land decks, then you can pay 3 and a blue, untap it, and try to block and kill some opponent's creatures that are coming in to attack that precious life total. Remember, we only begin with 24 life in a game of Momir Vig. All right, next creature up. It is our first multicolored creature of this installment, and oh boy, could it cause a lot of headaches at the Momir Vig table. And that's going to be Blood Tyrant, a 5/5 flying flyer with trample. At the beginning of our upkeep, each player is going to lose 1 life, and then we put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Tyrant for each 1 life lost this way. So let's just digest that for a moment. If we can untap with Blood Tyrant, and we're playing with 3 other players, this is going to be a 9/9 flying trampler for the investment of 7 mana. I don't think it's going to take much after that to be able to seriously threaten the life totals of our opponents and move closer to winning the game. And if a player loses the game, we put 5 +1/+1 counters on Blood Tyrant. So just imagine this. We cast Blood Tyrant on turn 7. We get it down there into play. Because of the limited amount of removal in this format, because there are no instants or sorceries, any removal must come from the creatures themselves. We untap with Blood Tyrant. We throw 4 +1/+1 counters on it by having each player lose 1 life if we're playing 4 at the table. Then we have a 9/9 Trampler. We send that bad boy into combat. Maybe we eliminate a player, and if we do 5 more +1/+1 counters, now we've got a 14/14 flying trample that if we untap again becomes a 17/17. And you can see what happens here. Blood Tyrant can spiral out of control very, very quickly, and I am looking forward to the moment where I can hopefully summon that to my side of the battlefield. All right, creature number 8. It is a mono red creature. It is the Bold Weird Intimidator. It's a 5/5 giant warrior that reads, cowards can't block warriors. So we can pay a red mana and target creature's type becomes coward until end of turn. We can also pay 2 and a red mana and target creature's type becomes warrior until end of turn. So MTGBC, make sure you have some mountains floating around in that basic land deck, because if you have enough of them on the battlefield, you could really have a lot of fun turning creatures into warriors and potential blockers into cowards. All right, another mono red addition to the Momir Vig Cube in the 7 spot. That's going to be Borderland Behemoth, a 4/4 giant warrior with trample. It gets +4/+4 for each other giant we control. And yes, there are other giants in the cube, and yes, it is possible to randomly summon them to your side of the battlefield. Imagine an 8/8 or maybe even a 12/12 trampler for the investment of 7 mana. And rounding out the first half in this installment, we have another multicolored creature. This one is the Boros Battle Shaper. It is a 5/5 Minotaur Soldier. At the beginning of each combat, up to 1 target creature attacks or blocks this combat, and up to 1 target creature can't attack or block this combat. So think of it like this. During every single player's combat, you get to pick which creature attacks, and you get to... Wait, is that right? Let's see this again. At the beginning, up to 1 target creature attacks or blocks this combat, if able, and up to 1 target creature can't attack or block this combat. Imagine calling those shots if you get Boros Battle Shaper onto the battlefield. That could make for a very, very quick ending to a game of Momir Vig. All right. Beginning the second half of our 20 creatures for this installment, we have our third colorless creature, and that's going to be Bronze Horse. It's a 4/4 trample, and as long as we control any other creatures, damage dealt to Bronze Horse by spells that target it is reduced to 0. So for the purposes of this Momir Vig Cube, this is really just a 4/4 trampler for 7 mana, because there are going to be no spells that deal damage to this, because there are no instant or sorcery spells. Creatures that come down are not going to count. So really, for the purposes of this cube, this is a 4/4 trampler for the investment of 7 mana. Next up, we have another mono black creature. We have Butcher of Malakir, a 5/4 flyer. Whenever he or another creature we control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. There are sacrifice effects woven into the Momir Vig Cube if you are lucky enough to have the Butcher and one of those effects and a bunch of random, meaningless, sacrificial fodder. You could really take control of the game by just making sure every one of your opponent's creatures are going to the graveyard as soon as you sacrifice one of those other creatures. All right, next creature up in the 13 spot, we have another mono red creature. This one is Butcher Org. It's a 6/6 Org, and we may divide Butcher Org's combat damage as we choose among defending player and any number of creatures they control. Can you imagine if this can get through with some form of added evasion? Now, it's just a 6/6, so it doesn't have flying or any kind of landwalk or unblockability or anything like that. But can you imagine if there is an effect on your side of the battlefield that can give that to Butcher Org? You can swing in and just start eliminating all of your opponent's creatures until they have nothing left, and then you just pick up the pieces and get ready to play another game of Momir Vig. Next creature up, we have another mono green creature. It is Carnage Worm, a 6/6 trampler with the Bloodthirst mechanic. Bloodthirst is going to be a little tricky in this format because you're going to need to find a way to deal some damage first before summoning from the Momir Vig Cube. So if you want to take that risk, and there are other Bloodthirst creatures in this cube, if you so choose to take the risk to send your creatures into combat first to get that damage done, or you're fortunate enough to have a creature that with an activated ability can deal some damage, then you can hope that Carnage Worm comes down with Bloodthirst 3 and gets 3 +1/+1 counters on it, as long as one of those opponents were dealt damage before this bad boy hits the field. If you do, and if you're fortunate and all the stars align, then you summoned a 9/9 Trampler for just 7 mana. All right, and the 15 spot, as we hit the 3/4 mark of this video, we have a mono white inclusion. It is Chancellor of the Annex. It's a 5/6 flyer. We're going to ignore the you may reveal this card from your opening hand because she's not going to be in our opening hand because she is in the Momir Vig Cube. However, with her on our side of the battlefield, whenever an opponent casts a spell, it gets countered unless that player pays an additional 1 mana. So for all intents and purposes of this format, this is pretty much a tax. If you're choosing to summon a creature spell of 5, you better make sure you have an additional mana to pay, or it's going to get countered on the spot. Chancellor of the Annex could be a way in which to control our opponents, limiting their ability to summon creatures with the mana that they have, allowing us to do so where they can't. Number 16 is another mono black edition, and it is another Chancellor, Chancellor of the Dross. Again, we're going to ignore the you may reveal this card from your opening hand clause, because just like Chancellor of the Annex and every other creature we've talked about in this series so far, they're all in the cube. So what we're left with our investment of 7 mana is a 6/6 flyer with lifelink. And at this point in a game, summoning a 6/6 with flying and lifelink for 7 in a format where we only begin with 24 life, that could be overly valuable because you can send this evasive bad boy into damage and you could very well be on the beneficial swing of 12 life points. Next up, another mono red and another Chancellor, and if you put these things together, you know what's coming up best, and this might be If the conditions on the battlefield are correct, this might be one of the most valuable 7-drops in the entire cube, and it's Chancellor of the Forge. Again, we're going to ignore the if it's in your opening hand clause. It's a 5/5, and when it ETBs, we create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens with haste, where X is the number of creatures we control. In a format that is combat-driven, where we can only summon one creature per turn, any creature that can create additional creatures becomes enormously advantageous. And if we line the stars just right, and we have a number of other creatures on the battlefield under our control, summoning a copy of Chancellor of the Forge could put us so far ahead of our opponents that we just win the game out of straight value. 3 creatures left, and it's another mono red edition. This time it's Chaos Maw, a 6/6 that when it ETBs, it deals 3 damage to each other creature. This is as close to a board wipe as we're going to get in this cube, and let's not look down at throwing out 3 points of damage to each other creature. That could send a lot of creatures from the battlefield right to their graveyards. Now, unfortunately, that does mean it can that does mean it can affect some of the creatures on our side of the battlefield. But like we've said throughout this series, not every creature is going to be uber helpful to you and overpowered. Although I will say, if it ends up that the 6/6 stands where everything else goes, I mean, it may be a little outside the realm of possibility. But that's the random nature of what the Momir Vig Cube is, folks. And if you summon that, there's going to be fireworks one way or another. All right, creature number 19 of this installment. We have another multicolored edition, and this one is the Charnel Horde Worm. It's a 6/6 trampler that when it deals combat damage to an opponent, let me reframe that. When it deals damage to an opponent, it doesn't have to be combat damage, which might be a little tricky in this format. However, when it deals damage to an opponent, we return a card from our graveyard to our hand. So for the purposes of this variant, because the only cards that will be in our graveyard will be lands, because every creature that's summoned from the cube is a token copy of the actual creature, and when they die, they're exiled. This really reads, whenever Charnel Horde Worm deals damage to an opponent, we return target land from our graveyard to our hand. And that could be extremely valuable because we put the lands in play to summon our to summon our creatures, but each time we summon a creature, we need to discard one of those lands, because that's the only way to get a creature from the cube onto the battlefield. And this is it, creature number 20 of this installment. It is another multicolored creature, and it is going to cause some headaches. It is Chromium the Mutable, a 7/7 flyer. It says it has flash. It says it can't be countered, but both of those are most likely irrelevant, particularly the flash mechanic, because everything is completely randomized through the cube. And let's face it, these are sorcery speed castings once per turn. So we have a 7/7 flyer that we can discard a card, and until end of turn, Chromium the Mutable becomes a human with base power toughness 1/1, loses all abilities, and gains hexproof. It can't be blocked this turn. So we have a built-in way to keep this creature protected in case of any activated or enter the battlefield triggers of our opponent's creatures that might send Chromium to the graveyard. And when we can protect it by keeping some lands in our hand, we're sending a 7/7 flyer into combat. And if our opponents don't have a way in which to block it with reach or another flyer, well, we're going to make very short work of the table because of Chromium the Mutable's ability to preserve itself. And there we have it, MTG BC, another 20 into the Momir Vig Cube. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.